Your focus, concentration, and attentiveness is one of the most important factors for your reading success. But what do we mean by these terms? Both focus and concentration mean using all available resources to successfully achieve a goal. If your goal is reading a book, for example, it means that you use all available brain capacity to achieve this goal, so to read the book. But there is a little difference between the two, so between focus and concentration, because you can be focused and not be concentrated at the same time, and vice versa. This has to do with a tiny little difference between the two. If, for example, a student has to write an assignment and he needs to write multiple assignments at the same time, he is not focused, but he can still be concentrated. So his focus is not on a special task, but if he's still working with concentration, his concentration can still be high. The same also goes vice versa. If a student only has one task, so finish one assignment, but his thoughts are anywhere but with the assignment, he is focused but not concentrated. That's the difference between the two. And in an ideal situation, you need both focus and concentration, because both focus and concentration are very important for your reading success. If you can't focus because you have to do multiple things at the same time, this will not help you at all to understand the text. And if you're not concentrated because, let's say, you didn't sleep that well last night, this will definitely also not improve your reading success. So how can you improve both of these things? I have 2 tips for you. The first tip is multitasking is not effective at all. And it's not just me who's saying that. Most studies about that topic have been showing that it's a lot less effective than doing each task individually. So do everything step by step. The most important thing here is to avoid distractions, and this also includes things like your phone, for example. For example, if you're reading a book, please put your phone away, because maybe you also know this feeling. You're reading something and then suddenly you just want to check your messages. You don't really pay that close attention, but then 20 minutes later you realize that your thoughts completely drifted away and that you've spent more than 20 minutes simply doing things at your phone without even realizing it. And to avoid this problem, put your phone away, and then once you're done with the task, you can use your phone without feeling bad about it. The other piece of advice that I can give you is use 100% of your brain capacity. This might sound a little weird to you right now, but your brain always uses 100% of its capacity. The problem is, if you don't use it with your task, your brain will find other ways to work at 100%. Most of the time it's evaluating past situations, and you know this feeling. Maybe you were in a discussion a few days ago, and while you're reading, your brain is still thinking about this. You can avoid that by using 100% of your brain capacity for reading. And a good way to do that is by using the speed reading techniques that I will give you, because they will be much more demanding for your brain. But if there is still a thought that is distracting you from reading, then no problem. Write it down on a sheet of paper and then come back later to it. This will help you not to forget the thought, but also to be able to focus on what's important now and then to be able to later come back to that thought. So try to keep distractions at a minimum. Alright, that's enough about concentration and focus. In our next lesson we will move on with motivation, another very important factor. Another extremely important factor for your reading success is motivation. Maybe you know that too. You're reading a text that you really like and that you're really motivated about, and after just a few hours or a few days, you're already done with it. You've read the whole book and you even know what's in there. On the other hand, if you have to read something that you really are not motivated to read, like let's say one old English classic that you have to read for school, it takes days, weeks, or even months and you still don't know what's in there. That's how powerful motivation is. Research shows that there's a direct correlation between motivation and success, especially between motivation and reading success. However, there are 2 types of motivation, and maybe you already heard of them. They are intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is every kind of motivation that is directly linked to your task. So if you're intrinsically motivated for reading, for example, you are motivated because you like the book or because you want to learn something that's in the book. If you are extrinsically motivated, on the other hand, that's a kind of motivation that is only indirectly linked to your task. So in the example of reading, for example, you're not motivated by the text itself or what's in the text, but because you know that by reading this text you achieve something else, so a second thing. For example, if you need to read something in order to pass a class, for example, or if you know that you will earn some money if you read something. Those are 2 examples for extrinsic motivation. So which one is better? Research shows that both intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are better than no motivation, but intrinsic motivation is always better than extrinsic motivation. That's because if you're really interested in the text, for example, it's a lot easier for you to read it and to understand it than if you're simply motivated because by reading the text you achieve something else. But still, as I already mentioned, both kinds of motivation are better than no motivation. So, what can you do to be more motivated, especially in situations where you're absolutely not? One way would be to try to create intrinsic motivation by scanning the book or text for something that you're really interested in. Maybe this feature will spark your interest in the text itself and it will make it much easier for you to read and understand the text. But if there's nothing like that, you can also work with extrinsic motivation, and that might be a little easier. And this can be as easy as, for example, saying that if you manage to read the whole text, you will treat yourself to something. For example, with a chocolate or with a trip to a place that you want to visit. There are endless possibilities. And all of that can help you kickstart your extrinsic motivation. So now we already know 2 of the 3 success factors for reading. So after focus, concentration and motivation, it's now time for the background knowledge. In our next lesson you will learn why background knowledge is so important and what you can do to improve it. And a little spoiler, it involves more than you think. See you then. For your understanding and reading speed, your background knowledge is extremely important. And this brings us to our 3rd and last factor for reading success, which is our background knowledge. If, for example, you're reading a detailed article about quantum physics and you don't know anything about it, it will be really difficult for you to understand it. If, on the other hand, you know a lot about food and specific diets and you read an article about the keto diet, for example, this will be a lot easier. All of that has to do with background knowledge. But background knowledge is not only the expertise in a specific area, it is also knowing the words and phrases in this area. That's why some texts are extremely easy for you to read because you already know most of the words and it's easier for your brain to detect these words, while there are other texts which are really hard to read because it's really hard for your brain to detect sentence structure, words and so on. That's also why people who read a lot tend to understand more when they read a new text because they know more words and more phrases. It's as always, practice is key. So your background knowledge can be very different in specific topic areas, and it also depends not only on your expertise in the specific area but also on the knowing of words and phrases. Maybe you do remember that in one of our first lessons we learned that reading is a complex process of decoding symbols. So the more symbols and the more combinations of symbols you know, the easier it becomes. You need to derive the meaning from these symbols, and the more you already know about the meaning in this area, the easier it becomes. If we're not able to do that because we don't have enough expertise or we don't know the words, I have 2 tips for you that you can use in those situations. Tip number 1 is a little more difficult to do. It is start with easy texts on the same topic and then work your way up. If, for example, you have a highly specialized text on quantum physics, start by easy introducing articles on that topic. Then, once you've understood these texts, gradually move your way up. The more you read about it, the easier it becomes, and suddenly you will be able to read the whole text. But of course, that takes a lot of time, and that's why I also have a second piece of advice for you. It is skim the text first in order to get a feel for the text. So when you first skim a text, you get a feel for the structure of the text, maybe you already see some first words, and that also gives you some kind of background knowledge. It doesn't need to take that long, but it will already help you for your real reading. By the way, this is also one of the speed reading techniques, but more on that in a later video. But basically the idea of this technique is to get as much background knowledge as possible in order to be able to read and understand the text as smoothly as possible. Alright, so those are the 3 main factors for your reading abilities. Your focus and concentration, your motivation and your background knowledge. Now it's time to start with the practical part of this course. In our next section, we will start with our first speed reading techniques. Are you ready? Let's jump into it. So what are these success factors? Overall, apart from the speed reading techniques that we are about to learn, your reading success is determined by 3 main factors, which are your focus, concentration and attentiveness, your motivation, and your background knowledge. Those 3 factors are the reason for whether you achieve your reading aim and understand the text that you are reading, or whether you read the text and you think, huh? What's that all about? So in order to ensure maximum reading success, it is super important that you are focused and your concentration is as high as possible, that you are motivated, in the best case intrinsically motivated, and that you have enough background knowledge to understand the text. This chapter will be all about these 3 factors and how to improve all of them. You will see that there's a lot that you can do to influence these 3 factors. But enough talking. In our next lesson we will start with focus, concentration and attentiveness.